Hello, everyone. My name is Ewa Zadworna. I'm Director of Cultural Affairs at the Kościuszko Foundation, and I want to welcome you to the online lecture on Tadeusz Kantor and the Polish Avant-Garde theater. This lecture was initially planned to take place at the Foundation's house in New York this month in May. Because of the pandemic, we had to cancel it, but instead of trying to reschedule it to another time, we decided to host it online and make it available to all viewers. Why Tadeusz Kantor? Why now? Well, without a doubt, Tadeusz Kantor was one of the most acclaimed and most influential figures of the 20th century theater. He is known not only as a brilliant stage director, but also as a set designer, an actor, a painter, a writer, recognized both in Poland and abroad. His theater productions spoke to audiences from all around the world, from Krakow, Paris, Shiraz, to Tokyo, Sydney, New York, to name just a few. Perhaps he is mostly known for his theater piece named The Dead Class, which Andrzej Wajda, Oscar-winning film director, named the greatest work of theater that was created in the 20th century. Also in 1976, the Newsweek magazine named the same play, The Dead Class, as the best theatrical play in the world. This year, 2020, marks the round anniversary of Tadeusz Kantor's birth, his death, as well as the round anniversary of the premiere of The Dead Class, which was first presented in 1975 at the Krzysztofory Gallery in Krakow, Poland. Today, while most theaters in most countries around the world remain closed because of the pandemic, perhaps it makes it even more relevant for us to shine light on the body of work, artistic legacy, and the messages conveyed by this extraordinary artist. It is my pleasure to introduce to you two speakers who are accomplished scholars, but most of all experts on Tadeusz Kantor, namely Dr. Krystyna Lipińska Illakowicz and Dr. Kathleen Cioffi. Dr. Krystyna Lipińska Illakowicz is a lecturer of Polish language, theater, and film at the Yale University. She writes on Polish-American cultural exchanges, theater, and film. She has published both in Polish and English about Witold Gombrowicz, Bruno Schulz, Tadeusz Kantor, and others. Currently, she is working on a book tentatively titled The Image of America in Poland in the 1920s and 1930s. She is also a co-editor of the theater journal European Stages. And Dr. Kathleen Cioffi is a book editor at the Princeton University Press. She is also a theater historian who frequently writes about Polish theater. She lived for 4 years in Gdańsk, where she founded the English language theater company called Maybe Theater, and did research for her book Alternative Theater in Poland, 1954-1989. Most recently, she co-edited with Magda Romańska of Emerson College the new book titled Theater Machine, Tadeusz Kantor in Context, which was published last month in April. Dr. Cioffi, Dr. Lipińska, welcome, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation to give this talk here today. But before we begin, I just want to make a quick note to all the viewers who are watching the premiere of this lecture on the Foundation's YouTube channel. Please feel free to make comments or ask any questions you might have in the chat box below. Both Dr. Cioffi and Dr. Lipińska are here, and they are available to answer any question or clarify any intricacies regarding the complicated nature of Kantor's work throughout and shortly after the lecture. This event is part of the Tadeusz Solowi Lecture of the Kościuszko Foundation. And now I give this home version of the virtual stage of the Kościuszko Foundation to Dr. Cioffi and Dr. Lipińska. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are honored to start this wonderful event, even though the times are not so wonderful. But I think Tadeusz Kantor would not be against it. You know, he was always into all kinds of conflicts and probing reality. So we thank you for the invitation. And to start, of course, I will give a very few short remarks about Tadeusz Kantor as a background before And afterwards, we'll talk about his relevance today. So Kantor, as it has been stated, was born in 1915 in a little village called Wielopole Skrzyńskie, which is located in the southern part of Poland between Rzeszów and Jasło. A significant part of Wielopole was that it was 50% Polish, 50% Jewish. Kathleen Cioffi will be talking about that later on. I'm not getting into it. Kantor studied at the Kraków Academy of Art already before the war, intermingling mostly from the beginning with the avant-garde experimental artists who were later on called Grupa Krakowska, with Maria Jarema, Jonasz Stern, Henryk Wiciński, Kazimierz Wikulski. And I'm repeating these names because especially Maria Jarema was a very important influence for Kantor. From the beginning, already as a student, Kantor was very much interested in the questions of reality. What is reality surrounding him? And he was from the beginning questioning the idea of representation, something that has been at the core of all maybe theater work or experimental theater work nowadays. Already at the university with Jaremianka, Kantor staged a little play by Maeterlinck in Polish, Śmierć Tanta Gillesa, I think Death of Tanta Jill in English. Jaremianka made, I say Maria Jarema made costumes. During the war, Kantor was painting, was producing his all kinds of ideas, but he also started his own theater, which was quite an accomplishment. In 1943, he staged Balladyna by Juliusz Słowacki, and in 1944, he staged The Return of the Odysseus by Stanisław Wyspiański. These two performances, they kind of very nicely capture Kantor's situationing himself in between romanticism, Balladyna, and something that he was questioning, something that was very modern, The Return of the Odysseus, and what I will be referring later on as postmodern, something that very strongly addresses the question of reality. What is more real? This unreal reality outside with everything burning in disaster, or the reality of the room inside? What is more real? So The Return of the Odysseus was the text that I would say was seminal for Kantor's work. After the work in 1955, Kantor reactivates the theater that actually Józef Jarema started before the war in 1937, the theater that Kantor called Kriko 2, because the previous one was called Kriko 1. And he starts with his ongoing relationship, I would say, with Stanisław Ignacy Witkiewicz, Witkacy. He starts with 1956 with the production of Cuttlefish, Montwa in Polish. Then The Country House, Madman and the Now, Water Hen, Dainty Shapes and Hairy Apes. Kantor produced all these performances, I would say, by Witkacy. Then in 1975, as Eva Zadworna mentioned, 1975, that's a mark of another very important stage for Kantor, The Dead Class, the beginning of Theater of Death. And Theater of Death and The Dead Class, again, made Kantor really renowned all over the world. After that, 1980 comes Wielopole, Wielopole. 1985, Let the Artist Die, the next piece, I Shall Never Return, 1988. And the last piece, Today's My Birthday, which premiered in 1991 on 10th January in Toulouse, already, unfortunately, after Kantor's death. Kantor dies on December 8th, 1990, because of a heart attack. And his theater continues a little bit. His actors were adamant about continuing. Andrzej Wełmiński plays Kantor in Today's My Birthday, but unfortunately, without Kantor, Kantor's theater could not exist. So this is briefly Kantor's main kind of account of Kantor's main performances. Of course, in between, Kantor paints all the time, abstract paintings, paintings that were called informal paintings. He also creates very famous happenings. For instance, such happenings like the letter, a happening that Kathleen Cioffi will be talking about a little bit because of the contemporary situation. Anatomy lesson according to Rembrandt, homage Amalia Jarema, or the very famous happening that was recreating a sea concert. And Kantor makes so-called cricotages, something between the sculpture and paintings, always preoccupied with the ideas of the baggage, memory, and all kinds of ideas that I will be talking about a little later. So I'm finishing here, and my friend Kathleen will be continuing.
Hello. I also want to thank the Kościuszko Foundation for hosting this. And I want to say that everything that I will say is, in a sense, I have 20 collaborators who also worked on this book, Theater Machine, which Eva Zadvorna mentioned, Tadeusz Kantor in Context. And so most of the insights that I will give to you about Tadeusz Kantor are not only from me, but from my collaborators on that book. The first thing that I want to underline about Kantor's biography that Krystyna already mentioned is his date of birth, 1915, which was in the middle of World War I, and then later he lived during World War II and experienced it. And so both of these two wars had a huge impact on particularly the theater of death stage in his development. The World War II, he actually lived in an apartment in Krakow, which was abutting the walls of the Krakow ghetto. So he was, in Krzysztof Pleśniowicz's words, an eyewitness to the Holocaust. So this had a huge impact on him. And the Jewish themes in many of his performances are very evident, and he's actually claimed often by the Jewish community as well as by the Polish community, even though he was not actually himself Jewish. Some people, because of things that Kantor said during his life, actually think that his father was Jewish. But it's the Krikoteka, which is the archive of Kantor in Krakow, the Archive and Research Center on Kantor, has not been able to find any confirmation that Kantor's father was Jewish. However, he did start his life in Wielopole, as Krystyna mentioned, and Wielopole was as much a Jewish town as it was a Polish town. In other words, it was both a miasteczko, a Polish town, and a shtetl, a Jewish town. So Kantor lived his early years surrounded by Jewish life. His great uncle with whom he lived in the rectory in Wielopole was like best friends with the town rabbi, and they used to walk around the garden in church discussing, having friendly arguments about religion. Kantor actually played with Jewish children, and the Jewish children actually told him that his father was Jewish, and so that he should play with them. So Jewishness had a big impact on Kantor, and he actually used it as a theme in many of his productions and artworks. So going back to those stages of his artistic development, which Krystyna also mentioned, which he wrote about in his essays, manifestos, poems, whatever you want to call them, because every stage he named and he wrote a manifesto about, and the manifestos took the form of poetry. So they are divided up into lines, and also each stage prior to 1975 was illustrated by a production that used a play by Stanisław Ignacy Witkiewicz-Witkacy. But as Kantor always said, he was not playing Witkacy in the sense of acting his plays or acting the text of his plays. He was playing with Witkacy. So the first stage actually encompassed the plays that he performed during the war, but also the very first play that he produced with the Kriko II, and it was called the Autonomous Theater. So it was the idea of the autonomous theater, Kantor declared, was that the theater must not merely present a piece of literature on the stage, but should have its own independent existence. And I am going to share a picture, actually, of... Okay, well, first, before I share the picture of the autonomous theater, this is a picture of the Dybbuk, which is a great Yiddish play, which was written in 1922. Kantor saw a production, this very production of the play, which actually was in Hebrew, and it toured Poland, and he saw it in 1938. It was performed by the Habima Theater, which in 1922, the first performances it was a studio of the Moscow Art Theater, but then it moved to Israel and became like the official theater of Israel. So when he saw it, Habima was already an Israeli theater, and the performance was in Hebrew. And he also saw other Yiddish theater productions and was influenced by him. Anyway, so the next slide, let's go to this. I don't know. That's this. This is a reconstruction of the set for Kantor's production, The Return of Odysseus, that Krystyna mentioned. It took place in actually an apartment in Krakow, which had been sort of bombed out, and we can see this cannon. This reconstruction is actually in part of the permanent display of Krikoteka in Krakow right now, and Kantor actually supervised this reconstruction, which happened before his death, but and then they sort of reconstructed it again when they rebuilt the Krikoteka Museum. His next stage was called the Informel Theater. And in the Informel Theater, Kantor advocated for a theater based on the principles of the French word informe, which means formless or misshapen. And so this is an art concept from the world of visual arts. And this is this stage started in about 1961, and with Kantor's production of Vitkazzi's Country House, in which the actors were all stuffed into a wardrobe, and some of them looked like they were hanging from hangers, as in this illustration. So this is actually another reconstruction, which is at the Krikoteka Museum. And this is what this production looked like. In this reconstruction, this is a mannequin hanging from the hanger, but in the real Country House, it was live actors. Then in his next stage, which was called Zero Theater, which happened just a few years later, Kantor tried to eliminate everything theatrical from his theater. So this is an illustration of the set for his production of Vitkazzi's The Madman and the Nun, where the whole stage was taken up by this structure called the Annihilation Machine. So this is actually a machine and the moving parts are wooden folding chairs, which these big arms that you can see lifted and opened, and it made a huge racket every time these chairs were constantly opening and closing. So the actors had to act all in and around this structure, and their words, the words of Vitkazzi's text, were sort of drowned out by the racket. So the next stage, which Krystyna also mentioned, was the stage of the happenings. Kantor staged the very first ever happenings in Poland, and this is a picture of his first the 1967 happening called The Letter, where 7 actual postmen took this letter across town from the post office through the streets of Warsaw to the Vauxhall Gallery, and Kantor was associated with that gallery. Also, another happening in the same year, let's see if I can, I don't know if I can go back to that. Oh yeah, here we go, is this one, which is called is part of something called the Panoramic Sea happening. One part of it was called the Sea Concert, and Kantor had a fellow artist conduct the sea, the waves of the Baltic Sea, as the audience watched. So here we see the other artist conducting the sea and the audience watching from the sort of the edge of the ocean. Then his production of the Madman and the Nun, which is one of Vitkazzi's plays, took place in a cafe, and the cafe and the audience. So the audience was seated all around. You can see the audience is back. This is Kantor on the left hand, and the character of the water hen at the top she sat in a kind of tub. So sorry, no, I want this. And anyway, so this was all part of the theater happening stage. The next one, it was called the Impossible Theater, and that is here. This was in this stage, Kantor declared that theater and art should not concern themselves with the possible, but with the impossible. And this is an illustration of Kantor's 1973 production of Vitkazzi's play Dainty Shapes and Hairy Apes, which took place entirely in a cloakroom of a theater. So you can see we have the entrance to the theater there. And then, but the whole play, the audience was never allowed to go into the theater. They had to stay in the cloakroom for the whole time. And then the last stage, which started in 1975, as Krystyna mentioned, and Eva mentioned, with the Dead Class, and lasted up until his death. In that, here is an illustration actually from the production I Shall Never Return in 1988. This is where Kantor explored the ability of the theater to bring back the dead and make them live again, if only for 90 minutes or so that the production was lasting. So So that now I shall stop sharing, and Krystyna will talk a little bit more about Kantor's approach.
Okay, thank you for these wonderful examples of Kantor's work, Kantor's themes, because what I want to talk about right now is what were the themes, what were the basic approaches that Kantor used. And I want to stress at the beginning that what we have seen, in fact, everything is an example of something that the theater theoreticians nowadays, starting with Andrzej Wirt, then Hans-Lis Thiemann, Elinor Fuchs, relate to as post-dramatic theater. Kantor is a point of reference in every discussion of post-dramatic, and as Kathleen said in the book, Hans-Lis Thiemann also has an essay, a chapter on Kantor. So Kantor created the theater. So what is this post-dramatic? So it's the theater in which there is no action, no linear action. There is meaning, but no action from the point of view of the old-fashioned theater, no drama. So to use the word drama in the post-dramatic context is not allowed. Drama can be used in a different context. Kantor was also not talking about drama. He was talking about text, about performance. Then language. How does the language function? The actors speak, but they do not use dialogue as means of communication and driving the action. Language is used in the so-called fatigue function more, non-communicative function, metaphorical function, yes, but it's not the dialogue that drives the action. Everything in this theater is sort of disjointed, falls apart, but it creates meaning. It creates a certain rhythm. It creates very important emotion. So that is post-dramatic. And right now, I would like to again go to share a screen and show a tiny little bit of Wielopole that illustrates all ideas. And then I will be talking more about these ideas. Oh. Well, why? I'm sorry. I have to share once again. I will move a little bit.
Dziadek nie siedział, nie chodził, nie stał. Ale nie chodził, nie stał. Dziadek leżał na krzesło. Dziadek spróbował na krzesło, ale dziadek z głowy zgłowia. Dziadek spróbował na krzesło, ale dziadek. Krzesło. Ciotka Nanka na krześle koło szafy, czyli było krzesło i stał stół. Jaki stół? No ten stół. Co stał tu? Gdzie? No ten mój stół. Tu nie stał żaden stół. Tu nie. Stołu nie było? Tu nie było stołu. Nie było, nie. Dziadek z głową wyzgłowia, to babka koło, babka! A dziadek z głową, babka koło dziadka. Ale szczyt babka koło dziadka. O, ciotka Józka. Józka? Ciotka. Józki tu Nie było. Nie. Gdyby była ciotka Józka, to byłaby ciotka Marka. Ale Józki nie ma. A Mańka? Gdyby była ciotka Mańka, to byłaby ciotka Józka. O! To walizka. Nie nasza. Ale babka koło dziadka. Szczyt. O! Karol! 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 Okno! A było, a drzwi nie były. Tylko że okno.
And I will stop sharing at this moment. Well, this short scene, very famous, between two uncles, played by Wacław and Lesław Janiccy. Well, it shows all the elements of Cantorian stage. What is happening there? It's messy. They don't know what to do. They are questioning everything. In fact, nothing is happening. It's sort of, and there are all elements of, that Kathleen mentioned. There is a wardrobe. There are all kinds of objects that they are looking for. So as we know, this is the reality, Cantor's reality. So what is that Cantorian reality that all these post-dramatic authors relate to? Well, it's a very fluid reality. One scene goes into another and changes, and it's very malleable. It's like Zygmunt Baumann's fluid reality. Every stage changes into something else, but there's constant movement in the performance. We can see that the twins are constantly doing something, but in fact there is no logic, no sense, no consequence to whatever they are doing. The theater, Cantor questioned the so-called theater illusion, that this is the representation of reality. Theater is theater. This space, as Kathleen said, is autonomous. He was taking that concept a little bit from Witkacy, who was also very strongly articulating the autonomous quality of the theater, but he made it really his own. So we can see all kinds of contradictions, instability. That is the reality. And here I want to talk about another important term very often used, reality of the lowest rank. Everything falls apart, everything is imperfect, the wood is old. Cantor was stressing the fact that all these objects have to be done from the stuff that is really worn out. There is no shining, glittering type of reality here, no hierarchy. There are no solutions. We are at the crossroads. And let me read something that he wrote in his notebooks. This is about theater autonomiczny, but Cantor used to very often write about something kind of, he was post-dating, whatever he was thinking about. He says about reality, I create such reality, such plots of events that have neither logical, analogical, parallel, nor juxtaposed reality with the drama. So, as Kathleen said, he was playing with the text, he was talking to the text, but he never played, he never put text on stage. The question of space, theatrical space, as already Kathleen mentioned, it was very often a stage that was a wardrobe. It was in a cafe. It was something that was not supposed to be the stage as such. And here, I would say Kantor was also close to something that we call site-specific theater. He loved outside of Poland. Most of his performances in Poland, in Kraków, were played in Krzysztofory. In Warsaw, he was using Stodoła, the student club. Outside of Poland, he was looking for all these spaces that were not theatrical, something that nowadays is used very often, but at that time, in Kantor's time, that was something that was really ahead of time. But the space was not theatrical, not specific, cramped, kind of unpleasant and unfriendly. The actor. Well, the actor famously presented, the Dead Class is very, very fantastic example of his treatment of the actor. The actor was an object and the object was an actor. We all remember mannequins from Kantor. Very often he had these people attached to an object, like let's say a bicycle man. People with suitcases and so on and so forth. So these people as objects. Kathleen will be talking about it later. I'm not talking about it. Now, let me maybe relate again to the text. The text is always fictional. The text is autonomous. And the text, as I said, does not drive the dialogue. And again, let me maybe quote from Kantor, what is that text? He says, a dramatic text is not presented, but discussed, commented on. The actors speak the lines, but reject them, return to them, and repeat them. The parts are not assigned, thus the actors do not identify with the text. The performance turns into a mill grinding the text. Młyn mielący text. This is a very famous statement that Kantor used. Very often everybody wants to understand every single word. I remember when I teach, the students want to know. You don't need to understand every single word, but the rhythm, the whole sort of atmosphere that the text creates, this is important. And this is what the authors like Robert Wilson, Richard Foreman in America, Elizabeth LeConte, Wooster Square Group, those people who made the post-dramatic, they very often relate to. When talking about the themes, I have to kind of very quickly mention a few more before Kathleen starts. In Kantor, we always see movement, and we always see journey, the journey, podróż, and the repetition of all these stages. It is not linear, but the people are moving from one state to the other. There is a need of progression, or maybe the necessity of progression, of progress, with the accompanying inability to achieve any progress. Kantor writes, the idea of a journey, it left a deep imprint on the Krakow theater. A grand wanderer, a Jew, the eternal wanderer, a fairground booth, life as a journey which is never ending and leading into the unknown. So again, Kantor's very strong words. And with this, memory, Kantor's theater is very often called theater of memory. How do we remember? We can see the uncles. They are constantly reshuffling their the past. Was and here was the window here. Where was it? This is memory, remembering, but in to a great extent, this is forgetting. And we remember as we carry these emballages, suitcases, packages, everything that creates history. History with the soldiers in Wielopole. We can We see the soldiers, we see historical backgrounds, and as Kathleen said, World War I, World War II, all kinds of, the Holocaust, of course, all these events, they create this cataclysmic French Revolution that repeats in some other pieces, I Shall Never Return, and so on. That all these events that mankind has gone through constitute Kantor's world. And in this world, at the very center, there is, of course, death, theater of death, and all the philosophical thinking about death and all the subtexts that create death, but also life. And I'm giving this space to Kathleen right now.
One thing I want to emphasize about Kantor's approach is that it was very much rooted in the avant-garde thinking, both of the visual art world and of the theater avant-garde of the early 20th century. And he kind of took ideas from both of those avant-gardes. Also, he was very musical, and he took music and used music in his productions, and even structured some of the productions as if they were pieces of music with repeating themes. Anyway, one of his earliest influences in his work, Krystyna mentioned Balladina, and that was influenced by the Bauhaus. So he was so I'm going to share. Okay. This again, and we are going to, okay, this is an illustration from Oskar Schlemmer's work. Oskar Schlemmer was the guy in the Bauhaus who did actual theater productions, and so this is from an essay that he wrote called Man, an Art Figure, in which he called for a new theater director who would use abstraction. The human body would be abstracted into geometrical shapes. So that's why we have the geometrical shapes in this. Kantor developed a keen interest in the Bauhaus's theater experiments while he was still a student at the Fine Arts Academy. And his marionette version of Maeterlinck's The Death of Tintagiles, which Krystyna mentioned before, was staged in 1937, and it owed a clear debt to Schlemmer. So I'm going to show you a little illustration. This is an illustration from Kantor's puppet production of The Death of Tintagiles. This is his sketch for the puppets. Then he returned actually to this production in 1987 in a cricotage that he did called The Theater of Love and Death. And here we have, I think, yes, yeah, oh, oops, back to that. This is an illustration from that. So we have the puppets again, and actually Kantor called these puppets his Uber marionettes, and that relates to the work of another early 20th century theoretician, Edward Gordon Craig, who wrote an essay about how actors should be replaced by Uber marionettes. Anyway, also Kantor's wartime production of Balladina was influenced by the Bauhaus. In this case, instead of abstracting people into puppets, he encased the actors in geometrical forms. So you can see the costumes are all like geometrical forms. So Krystyna also mentioned his wartime production of The Return of Odysseus, and all the way to his last production, Today Is My Birthday. Kantor used objects in his productions. We saw how the uncles were talking about the chair and the table and where they went. They were trying to reconstruct memories by getting all the objects in the right places. So many times the objects that Kantor used in his productions were just real everyday objects like chairs and tables. But also, so they were, as they say in the visual art world, ready-made. But other times they were modified. For example, as in the Annihilation Machine that we saw earlier, or the Cloakroom, and they embodied his idea of the reality of the lowest rank that Krystyna mentioned. So they were always, not fancy objects, but everyday objects. So in his nearly 4 decades of theater work, he also assembled something that he called the Human Nature Preserve. And this is consisted of so-called bio-objects, where an object and a person would be fused into one symbiotic entity. So these characters could have names like the man with a suitcase or the helpless man with a table. And they would be named after and defined by their objects. So here we have, this is a scene from the Dead class. In this scene, we can see the man with a bicycle. So in the Dead class, every character also has a little mannequin of himself. And the man with the bicycle, his mannequin is attached to the bicycle that's in the center. Then at the very top of the picture, we have the woman behind a window, another character. And at the bottom, those legs are coming out of an object called the family machine, which was intended to allude to sex and reproduction. So also I want to mention one other thing. Kantor also talked about his theater as poor theater. Now this term is generally associated with another avant-garde director of the 20th century, another Polish avant-garde director, Grotowski. But Grotowski's poor theater and Kantor's poor theater are actually, the word poor are 2 different words. So in Grotowski's poor theater was actually called teatr ubogi. So the word poor was ubogi, which means humble or ascetic. It's something that you choose to be. Whereas Kantor, he used the term biedny, meaning just without money or impecunious, or also it can mean unfortunate. So Kantor's poorness was more connected with the reality of the lowest rank. We use poor objects, things that were, sort of beaten up looking. And whereas Grotowski's Teatr Ubogi was more connected with everything must be centered on the actor and the actor's training. Lastly, I want to speak about Kantor's influence over the years and how it's grown. In 1985, while Kantor was still alive, a Polish theater critic wrote that his was a lonely theater. It was important, but it had no meaningful movement, school, or following, unlike Grotowski's, which was very involved in training various actors all over the world. However, now I think actually more and more theater and performance artists, both in Poland and all over the world, consider Kantor to be an inspiration. So in Poland, we have several contemporary visual artists who are inspired by Kantor. One of them is Zbigniew Libera, and in his 1984 film Intimate Rights, he actually creates another theater of death where he is ministering to the inert body of his dying grandmother. This is a sort of, I'm afraid, a little bit blurry picture from that film. Then we talked about the letter before, and I showed you Kantor's letter from 1967. In 2011, the artist Gorzka Machuga restaged Kantor's letter from 1967, but whereas Kantor's letter was delivered to the Folksall Gallery, Machuga's letter was delivered to the Zachęta Gallery. You can see the address actually on the picture here, and which they had received around the time of 2011. They had been receiving many not so nice letters protesting against the modern art that they showed there, you know, and so Machuga was, this was actually a kind of artistic statement against those people who thought that modern art was bad. She was sending this letter saying, no, what you're doing is good. And more recently, in fact, on May 6th of this year, another group of visual artists in Warsaw restaged Kantor's letter. And this time, the letter was restaged as a protest against the government's plan for the elections. And this time, the letter was delivered to Parliament, and the artists actually received fines for not doing this. It's not actually clear what the government's reason for the fines was, because they are socially distancing themselves just by the very nature of the way they staged it, but they still had these fines. Also, avant-garde theater artists are also influenced by Kantor. Christian Lupa, he has named Kantor as a major influence on him, and his production Persona Marilyn, which this is a scene from, which is staged in 2009, and he conducts a kind of metaphoric autopsy on the remains of Marilyn Monroe in this. So it is a kind of allusion to Kantor's happening, which was called the it was about an autopsy on a very famous painting of Rembrandt's and done in the 1960s. But it also is a kind of theater of death, because Marilyn Monroe is dead in this production, but yet she comes back to life. So, and even not so avant-garde productions are a major. They cite Kantor as a major influence. So here on the left-hand side of the screen, we have a scene from The Dead Class. But then on the right-hand side, we have a scene from Tadeusz Słowodzianek's play, which is called Our Class. And Słowodzianek actually claimed that he had seen The Dead Class in 1975 when he was a student. So he restaged the production of Our Class, which is done in Warsaw, and is still playing from time to time at the Teatr na Woli. Is actually the beginning and the end of it have this very picture or sort of still life, which recalls The Dead Class. And actually there are some themes also in the play which recall Kantor's themes. In The Dead Class, we have actually the class is sometimes Jewish, and they speak as if they are students in a Jewish elementary school, or cheder. They recite in Yiddish or in Hebrew. They recite the Hebrew letters of the alphabet. So they are evidently Jewish students. And in Słowodzianek's class is mixed Polish and Jewish, and they are, and we actually see what happens to that class through the course of the play, and they become dead. Kantor's students are dead before the play begins, and they come back to life. In Słowodzianek's play, the students die during the course of the play, but even after they are dead, they speak to us. Then in other countries, we have theater artists who are who claim Kantor as inspiration. In this scene, yes, this is a scene from the Swiss director Christoph Marthaler, who has directed productions that have elements in common with Kantor's Zero Theater. This performance, which is entitled Production from the Future, in 2005, it was staged in a psychiatric hospital. Then we have, this is a production by the Latvian director, Alvis Hermanis. And this production has elements in common with Kantor's autonomous theater. In this production, which is called Long Life from 2003, he collected items that were left in apartments after the deaths of solitary, lonely people. So all the props and scenery is constructed from those objects. And the play told the story of a day in the life of elderly inhabitants of a communal apartment from the Soviet times. Then the Flemish director Luc Percival has directed productions that have elements in common with Kantor's Theater of Death. This is a production of Percival's, which is based on Uncle Vanya, and in this production he bound his actors to chairs from which they unsuccessfully tried to get up, but they were always tossing out scraps of Chekhov's dialogue from Uncle Vanya. Then also the French director and installation artist Gisèle Vienne has also been influenced by Kantor, and this is an installation that she did at the Centre Pompidou in Paris called Teenage Hallucination in 2012, in which she used mannequins like in the Dead class. The Americans, Robert Wilson, who Krystyna mentioned, this is actually called Homage to Tadeusz Kantor. So he has he is directing the waves here at the ocean, and actually in the back of him, the person whose back you can see is the performance artist Marina Abramovich, and Bob Wilson is the guy who's facing us. So this was staged at the Watermill, which is Bob Wilson's place during the summer program of 2013. And then the Wooster Group that Krystyna mentioned before. This is a scene from their production of 2017 called A Pink Chair in Place of a Fake Antique. And actually this, we have various people costumed in ways that recall various of Kantor's productions. So Kantor, he seems to, I'm going to stop the sharing now. Kantor seems to speak to us in the 21st century in a way that perhaps he didn't speak so much to us in the 20th century. So I think this is why now more and more theater artists, visual artists are alluding to his work. Why does he speak to us? What about our 21st century life is Cantorian? Well, now we are grappling with the kind of materiality of our existence in a way that we maybe didn't so consciously do it before, because of things like artificial intelligence, these devices that we're always carrying around with ourselves all the time, techno objects of various kind, and algorithms. We deal with them on a daily basis now. Kantor confronted questions in the 20th century that were very pressing, maybe the most pressing questions, but he, and also the least comfortable questions, those of a human being's worth, his dignity, his essence, and his purpose. But he might have also been unwittingly a harbinger of our 21st century's political, ethical, aesthetic, and critical discourse. And I think this is why we're getting more and more interested in Kantor today. So, did you have anything you wanted to add, Krystyna?
Yeah, I think that, you know, thank you for summing up this Cantorian presence. I would like to very quickly only say that Kantor was present in America from almost, well, not from the very beginning, but the Dead Class was presented in La Mama. La Mama in New York was the center, Kantor Center in America. And La Mama came to New York in 1979, Wielopole, 1982. Then in 1984, during the Olympic Games in Los Angeles, Kantor's Dead Class. And it was a very important presence of Kantor all over in the world, I would say. The Dead Class was staged at the Olympic Arts Festival. And in 1988, there was I Shall Never Return. And in 1991, La Mama had already the posthumous presentation. And I just want to show a very quick poster. Okay, I will just share the screen for the last moment. This I will close. I'm closing this. And here is Kantor's Dead Class poster. Today's my birthday. The quality is not so phenomenal. Here, Tadeusz Kantor Dead Class, June 12, 16. The whole festival was June 8, 23, 1991. Here we have all Kantor's actors. And this is today's my birthday. We can see that the festival was from June 8 till 23 for quite a considerable amount of time. And I will stop sharing. I just wanted to say that. And just one more thing that I would like to stress, that Kantor's performances were very visual, they were provocative, they instigated this connectedness through all kinds of associations. They were against representation, and but they were serious, and they were talking about, you know, they were called theater of death, but they were also a lot of humor. They were light. They were there was a lot of laughter also. So in Kantor, there is always this contrast between something very serious and something light and humorous. There was a lot of emotion. Kantor really creates some emotion that talks to people that is sometimes difficult to even verbalize. But this is our life. And Kantor created theater full of all these elements, theater that was full of beauty. And I will stop here. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, we would like to invite you on Thursday, May 28th, 1 o'clock. After 1 o'clock, probably around 2, there will be, we'll be very happy to talk and to answer any questions. Thank you very much. Kasia? Kathleen?
Yes, I want to say that actually during the showing of this this lecture, this dual lecture, you can ask questions in the chat box on YouTube at any time, and we will be available to answer them and also make comments. You can make comments as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.